The greatest danger to justice begins the moment assumptions speak louder than facts. The departure terminal of Reagan National Airport pulsed with the familiar rhythm of another busy weekday morning. Rolling suitcases echoed across polished floors, overhead announcements guided travelers toward departing flights, and long lines stretched through security checkpoints beneath bright ceiling lights that reflected across wide glass walls overlooking the runways. Business travelers hurried toward their gates with coffee in one hand and boarding passes in the other. Families gathered around departure screens searching for flight numbers while airport employees moved efficiently through the crowds with practiced precision. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, until one unexpected encounter quietly transformed the atmosphere of the entire terminal. Officer Ryan Mitchell stood near Gate C surrounded by airport security personnel, observing the flow of passengers with the confidence that years of law enforcement experience had built one decision at a time. He believed he could recognize suspicious behavior almost immediately. Experience, he often reminded younger officers, taught people to trust their instincts before explanations had the chance to complicate simple decisions. That confidence had gradually become part of every interaction he had with the traveling public. Then his attention settled on a black woman walking alone through the terminal. She wore a tailored charcoal business suit, polished black heels, and carried a simple leather briefcase instead of expensive luggage. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance. No government escort. No security detail. No assistants walking ahead to clear a path. She moved calmly through the terminal, pausing briefly to help an elderly traveler retrieve a boarding pass that had slipped onto the floor before continuing toward Gate C with quiet confidence. Her name was Evelyn Brooks, although no one nearby appeared to recognize her. Ryan stepped directly into her path before she reached the boarding area. "Ma'am, I need you to stop for a moment," he said firmly. Evelyn immediately stopped and looked at him with calm brown eyes. "Good morning, officer," she replied politely. "How may I help you?" Her steady voice somehow unsettled him more than an argument would have. Ryan studied her carefully before answering. "I need to verify your identity before you continue." Evelyn nodded respectfully and slowly reached toward the leather briefcase resting beside her. Before she could remove anything, Ryan raised one hand. "Leave it where it is." Evelyn immediately lowered her hand. "Certainly," she answered. "If you allow me a moment, I can explain where I am going." Ryan interrupted before she finished speaking. "You can explain after I determine whether you belong in this restricted boarding area." Several nearby passengers slowed their pace. A business traveler quietly stepped aside while two college students waiting near the gate exchanged uncertain glances. A traveler holding a smartphone instinctively pointed the camera toward the growing conversation. Public moments have a way of attracting silent audiences without anyone planning to become part of them. Evelyn remained remarkably composed. She neither protested nor demanded special treatment. She simply stood where she had been instructed, her expression unchanged despite the growing attention surrounding her. Ryan interpreted her calmness as confidence that had not yet been earned. "People cannot simply walk into restricted areas because they believe they belong there," he said. Evelyn met his eyes with quiet sincerity. "Officer, every person deserves the opportunity to be heard before a conclusion is reached." Her words carried no anger, no frustration, and no attempt to challenge his authority. Believing he was acting appropriately, Ryan informed Evelyn that she would be placed under arrest pending verification of her identity. She complied peacefully with every lawful instruction, offering no resistance and asking for no special consideration. Around them, conversations gradually faded as more travelers turned toward the unusual scene. Some reached for their phones. Others simply watched in silence. Evelyn never revealed who she was. She never mentioned the important flight waiting beyond the gate. She only glanced once toward the departure board with calm patience, as though she understood that truth had never needed to hurry because eventually it always arrived exactly where justice expected it to be. Inside the airport operations center, however, departure coordinators and federal officials had already begun asking the same quiet question. Where was the justice? Justice Evelyn Brooks remained exactly where Officer Ryan Mitchell had instructed her to stand, her leather briefcase resting quietly beside her while the constant rhythm of Reagan National Airport continued around them. Boarding announcements echoed through the terminal, rolling suitcases crossed polished floors, and passengers hurried between gates believing they were watching nothing more than another routine security stop. To every traveler passing by, Evelyn appeared to be an ordinary passenger delayed before boarding. She made no effort to change that impression. Instead, she quietly observed the departure gate with the calm familiarity of someone who had traveled through airports countless times before. Officer Ryan Mitchell remained convinced that every passing minute confirmed the judgment he had already reached. The more composed Evelyn appeared, the more certain he became that she was concealing something important. In his experience, innocent travelers usually rushed to explain themselves. Some became nervous. Others immediately searched for documents or asked to speak with supervisors. Evelyn did none of those things. Her patience somehow strengthened his assumptions rather than challenging them. "You seem unusually calm," Ryan finally remarked. Evelyn looked toward him with the same respectful expression she had maintained since arriving. "Remaining calm usually helps everyone make better decisions," she answered softly. Ryan folded his arms. "Good decisions begin with following instructions." Evelyn nodded immediately. "I agree completely." There was no sarcasm in her voice. No frustration. Only quiet dignity. Nearby, an airline gate agent paused briefly before returning to the boarding counter. Two business travelers waiting beside the departure windows exchanged uncertain glances while a college student quietly lowered a backpack and continued watching from a respectful distance. Several passengers discreetly held their phones at chest level, recording the unusual interaction without interfering. Public moments often gathered silent witnesses before anyone realized history was quietly unfolding. Inside the airport operations center, however, concern had already begun spreading through multiple departments. Departure coordinators reviewed flight manifests while transportation officials checked arrival records and security logs. A government liaison stood beside Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes studying an electronic departure board where one scheduled passenger remained unchecked despite arriving at the airport earlier that morning. "Has she cleared security?" Michael asked quietly. One operations specialist shook his head. "Transportation confirmed she arrived, but there is no boarding record." The room became noticeably quieter. "That flight cannot depart without her," another official replied. At the same moment, U.S. Marshal Olivia Grant reviewed airport surveillance feeds displayed across several large monitors. One camera overlooking Gate C repeatedly showed a woman wearing a charcoal business suit standing calmly near airport security while several travelers watched from a distance. The image remained too far away for immediate confirmation, yet the posture, the leather briefcase, and the remarkable composure felt unmistakably familiar. Olivia enlarged the recording and studied it for another moment before slowly lowering the tablet in her hands. "I believe I know where she is," she said. Without waiting another second, she turned toward the terminal accompanied by Michael Hayes and several federal security officers. Outside the operations center, boarding announcements continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Back near Gate C, Ryan received a routine radio message requesting all available airport officers remain alert because federal officials were searching for an important government traveler whose departure had become unexpectedly delayed. He acknowledged the transmission without connecting it to the woman quietly standing before him. To Ryan, the search involved someone else entirely. Evelyn briefly looked toward the departure gate before speaking again. "Officer, every journey depends on reaching the correct destination." Ryan answered firmly. "Procedure comes first." Evelyn offered a gentle smile. "The best procedures always leave room for careful understanding." Those simple words lingered quietly beneath the sound of boarding announcements. Ryan remained silent because he believed he already understood everything necessary to complete his assignment. Only a short distance away, U.S. Marshal Olivia Grant stepped into the terminal, scanned the waiting passengers, and the moment her eyes settled on the woman standing calmly beside Officer Ryan Mitchell, the distance between assumption and truth suddenly became shorter than anyone inside the airport could possibly imagine. Officer Ryan Mitchell had spent enough years working airport security to believe that experience could identify problems long before conversations revealed them. Every routine encounter that ended without incident reinforced that belief until confidence quietly became certainty. Standing near Gate C beneath the bright terminal lights, he watched Justice Evelyn Brooks with growing suspicion simply because she refused to become emotional. Most travelers in similar situations immediately explained themselves. Some protested. Others hurried to retrieve identification or demanded supervisors. Evelyn did none of those things. She remained composed, her leather briefcase resting quietly beside her while the steady flow of passengers continued around them. Her patience somehow convinced Ryan that she was hiding something rather than simply remaining calm. "You still have not explained why you were heading toward this gate," he said firmly. Evelyn looked toward him with warm brown eyes before answering. "I offered to explain when we first spoke." Ryan replied almost immediately. "I will decide when explanations become necessary." Evelyn acknowledged the statement with a respectful nod. "Very well." There was no frustration in her voice, only quiet discipline. Nearby, a family preparing to board quietly gathered their children closer while two airline employees exchanged uncertain glances across the boarding counter. A businessman lowered his laptop after noticing several passengers discreetly watching the interaction. Overhead departure announcements continued calling travelers to distant gates as though nothing unusual was happening. Yet the atmosphere around Gate C had begun changing in subtle ways that few people fully understood. Inside the Airport Operations Center, concern continued growing with every passing minute. Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes stood before a wall of digital displays reviewing departure schedules while transportation coordinators checked updated passenger records. One secure government itinerary remained highlighted in red because an essential traveler had not boarded as expected. "Any confirmation?" Michael quietly asked. A transportation coordinator shook his head. The passenger entered the terminal on schedule. There is still no boarding record. U.S. Marshal Olivia Grant continued reviewing surveillance footage displayed across multiple monitors. The enlarged image from Gate C now showed the woman more clearly. The charcoal business suit, the leather briefcase, and the unmistakable calm expression immediately confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Olivia looked toward the federal liaison standing beside her. "That is Justice Brooks." Without another moment of hesitation, she picked up her radio. "Everyone with me." Several federal security officers immediately followed as she moved quickly through the operations corridor toward the public terminal. Back near Gate C, Ryan received another routine radio transmission. "Attention all airport security units. Federal officials are searching for an important government traveler delayed inside the terminal. Remain alert and report unusual activity." Ryan acknowledged the message with complete confidence. Understood. He never considered that the search might already have ended only a few feet away. Evelyn quietly glanced toward the departure board where the scheduled boarding time slowly approached before looking back at Ryan. "Officer," she said gently, "sometimes the most important destination depends upon allowing every fact to arrive before the journey continues." Ryan answered without hesitation. "Security depends on making decisions quickly." Evelyn offered a faint smile. "The strongest decisions are both careful and timely." Ryan remained silent. He believed he had already gathered everything necessary to justify his actions. Across the terminal, Olivia Grant emerged into the busy concourse accompanied by federal security personnel and Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes. Travelers instinctively stepped aside as the group moved with calm determination toward Gate C. One by one, Curious passengers turned to watch them approach. Ryan noticed the officials immediately and instinctively straightened his posture, preparing to explain what he believed had been a routine airport security matter, completely unaware that only a few more steps separated every assumption he had made from the truth that had been waiting patiently before him since the beginning of the morning. U.S. Marshal Olivia Grant crossed the busy terminal with calm determination, followed by Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes and several federal security officers whose expressions reflected growing concern rather than panic. Around them, travelers instinctively stepped aside while rolling suitcases slowed across the polished floor. Airline employees paused behind the boarding counter. Flight attendants standing near Gate C quietly exchanged uncertain glances as the group approached. Officer Ryan Mitchell immediately straightened his posture, convinced the arriving officials were responding to the airport security situation he believed he had handled correctly. He glanced briefly toward Evelyn Brooks before addressing the approaching Marshal. Marshal Grant, he began confidently, this individual attempted to access a restricted boarding area without verified authorization. I detained her while confirming her identity. Olivia listened without interrupting a single word. When Ryan finished speaking, she looked past him toward Evelyn, and the concern that had filled her face throughout the morning disappeared immediately. She stepped forward with unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Justice Brooks," she said warmly. "We have been searching throughout the terminal for you. The aircraft has remained on standby because everyone has been waiting for your arrival." Those words settled across the departure gate in complete silence. Michael Hayes quietly released a slow breath before adding, "Your Honor, we were beginning to believe something unexpected had happened." Evelyn acknowledged both of them with the same composed smile she had carried since entering the terminal. "I appreciate everyone's patience," she replied gently. "It appears this morning offered all of us an opportunity to practice it." Ryan felt every assumption he had made begin to collapse beneath the weight of a single truth. The woman he had quietly judged, detained, and prevented from boarding was not simply another traveler moving through the airport. She was a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States whose presence had been essential to an official government flight waiting only a short distance away. Around them, whispers spread quietly through the terminal. Several passengers lowered their phones before exchanging astonished glances. Airline employees looked from Ryan to Evelyn with visible disbelief while boarding agents temporarily paused the departure process. Olivia Grant turned toward Ryan with complete professionalism. "Officer Mitchell," she said calmly, "Justice Brooks routinely travels without unnecessary ceremony whenever possible. She has always believed that every traveler deserves to experience the same public process." Ryan slowly removed his patrol cap, his voice noticeably quieter than before. "Your Honor, I sincerely apologize." Evelyn looked directly at him with steady kindness. "Thank you, officer." She paused briefly before continuing. "An apology becomes meaningful when it changes tomorrow's decisions." No one interrupted. Even the constant background noise of the terminal somehow seemed quieter as those simple words settled over everyone present. There was no anger in her voice. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Only quiet dignity. Michael Hayes respectfully returned Evelyn's leather briefcase exactly as it had been when she first entered the terminal. She accepted it with a grateful nod before turning once more toward Ryan. "Every traveler deserves confidence that they will be treated fairly before assumptions decide the outcome," she said softly. Ryan met her eyes. "I understand that now." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Then today has already accomplished something worthwhile." Olivia quietly signaled toward the boarding bridge where the flight crew remained waiting. "Your Honor, the aircraft is ready whenever you are." Evelyn thanked her and calmly walked toward the gate. Flight attendants respectfully stepped aside while the boarding door opened before her. Warm afternoon light poured through the terminal windows as she disappeared down the jet bridge. Ryan remained standing beside the departure gate, watching silently as the woman he had underestimated continued toward the flight she had nearly missed, finally realizing that true authority had never needed to announce itself because genuine character had already spoken long before anyone recognized the title it carried. The aircraft departed only after Justice Evelyn Brooks quietly took her seat, and before the cabin door closed, she thanked every member of the flight crew for their professionalism as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Inside the terminal, however, the events at Gate C had already begun moving through official channels. Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes requested that every report connected to the incident be preserved according to standard procedure. Security camera recordings, officer reports, radio communications, and terminal surveillance were secured before anyone discussed conclusions. By late afternoon, Officer Ryan Mitchell was asked to attend a formal review inside the Airport Security Administration office. The conference room overlooked the runways where aircraft continued arriving and departing with quiet precision, reminding everyone that public confidence depended upon thousands of ordinary decisions made correctly every day. Captain Daniel Foster stood beside a large display screen while supervisors, airport security managers, and federal representatives quietly took their seats. No one entered the room expecting humiliation. They entered expecting honesty. Captain Foster waited until the door closed before speaking. The purpose of this review is not to protect assumptions. It is to understand decisions. One by one, the recordings appeared across the display. Terminal surveillance showed Justice Brooks calmly approaching Gate C. Another camera captured her helping an elderly traveler retrieve a boarding pass before continuing toward the boarding area. A different angle confirmed that she immediately complied with every instruction she received. The body camera recording preserved every conversation exactly as it occurred. Her voice remained respectful. Her movements remained calm. She never refused a lawful instruction. She never attempted to leave. Every recording told the same story from a different perspective. The room remained completely silent as the final video ended. Captain Foster looked toward the officers seated around the table. "What do the facts show?" One supervisor quietly answered, "Complete cooperation from beginning to end." Another added, "Nothing in her conduct suggested hostility, resistance, or urgency." Ryan continued looking at the frozen image displayed on the screen where Justice Brooks stood patiently near the boarding gate. For the first time, he was not remembering the encounter through his own certainty. He was seeing it exactly as it had happened. Captain Foster then addressed him directly. "Officer Mitchell, after reviewing every recording, what stands out to you most?" Ryan took a slow breath before answering. "Justice Brooks never gave me a reason to question her character. I allowed my first impression to become my final conclusion before I truly observed her actions." No one interrupted him. The admission required no additional explanation. Later that afternoon, Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes informed Ryan that Justice Brooks had agreed to meet briefly before continuing her official schedule after landing. A secure video conference was arranged between the airport administration office and the government reception area where she had arrived. Justice Brooks appeared on the screen carrying the same leather briefcase, her calm expression unchanged despite everything that had happened. Ryan spoke first. "Your Honor, I want to apologize again. I understand now that every traveler deserves fairness before assumptions." Justice Brooks acknowledged his words with a gentle nod. "Thank you, officer." An apology becomes meaningful when it changes the next decision rather than the last one. She paused briefly before continuing. "Every airport welcomes people from different places, different professions, and different lives. None of us should expect respect only after our titles become known." The room remained silent as her words settled over everyone present. Captain Foster confirmed that additional training focusing on communication, observation, and impartial public interaction would become part of future airport security instruction. Justice Brooks smiled warmly. "Strengthening the process will always matter more than protecting pride." Before the connection ended, she looked directly toward Ryan one final time. Public trust is built one respectful encounter at a time. Protect that, and you protect far more than an airport. As the screen slowly faded to black, everyone inside the conference room understood that the most important lesson of the day had never been taught inside a courtroom or aboard an aircraft. It had been demonstrated quietly in an airport terminal by someone whose character had revealed true justice long before anyone recognized her title. Over the months that followed, the events at Gate C gradually became more than a security report preserved inside airport archives. They became the starting point for meaningful conversations about professionalism, communication, and the responsibility carried by every person entrusted with public safety. Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes worked alongside Captain Daniel Foster to introduce revised training for every airport security officer assigned to passenger screening, terminal patrol, and boarding gate operations. Instead of focusing only on regulations and procedures, the new program emphasized observation, respectful communication, and the importance of allowing facts to develop before assumptions shaped decisions. Captain Foster began each training session with a single sentence displayed across the presentation screen. Every traveler deserves dignity before their identity is known. The room always remained quiet before the first lesson even began. Officer Ryan Mitchell attended every session, not because policy required additional instruction, but because he understood that meaningful change demanded more than acknowledgement. It required daily practice. During one discussion, a newly assigned airport officer asked how someone could balance quick security decisions with patience. Ryan answered without hesitation. Security protects people best when observation comes before assumption. The extra moment spent listening may prevent the wrong conclusion from lasting much longer. The room remained silent as several officers quietly wrote those words into their notebooks. Across the country, Justice Evelyn Brooks continued serving the Supreme Court with the same quiet discipline that had defined her career long before that remarkable morning inside the airport terminal. Oral arguments resumed, judicial conferences continued, and constitutional questions once again occupied every working day. She never referred publicly to what had happened because she believed confidence in public institutions grew stronger through improvement rather than personal attention. Yet whenever law students or judicial interns asked what quality mattered most in public service, her answer remained remarkably simple. Respect should never wait for recognition, she would say. Every person deserves fairness before anyone knows their title. Those words quietly spread through legal education programs, judicial seminars, and mentoring conversations because they reflected principles larger than one difficult experience. Several months later, Reagan National Airport hosted a community aviation day welcoming students, families, veterans, and civic organizations interested in learning how aviation safety, transportation, and public security worked together. Airport employees, airline staff, law enforcement officers, and federal representatives volunteered throughout the terminals, answering questions and guiding visitors through educational exhibits. Officer Ryan Mitchell spent the afternoon greeting guests, patiently explaining airport procedures, and personally assisting travelers who appeared uncertain about where to go. Nearby, Justice Evelyn Brooks quietly observed him helping an elderly traveler who had become separated from a tour group. Instead of pointing toward the information desk, Ryan walked beside the traveler until a volunteer safely reunited them with the group. Justice Brooks smiled softly before continuing toward another educational presentation without saying a word. She understood immediately that the most meaningful lessons rarely announced themselves. They appeared quietly through ordinary choices repeated every day. As evening sunlight reflected across the terminal windows and departing aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky, passengers continued beginning journeys to destinations across the country. Most of them never knew what had once happened near Gate C. They simply experienced patience, courtesy, professionalism, and respect without realizing how carefully those values had been strengthened. Perhaps that was the greatest success of all. Public trust was never built by dramatic moments alone. It was built quietly through thousands of ordinary encounters where people chose understanding before certainty, fairness before assumption, and dignity before recognition, allowing justice to travel with every person long before any destination was finally reached. As another year quietly unfolded, the lesson that had begun near Gate C gradually became woven into the everyday culture of the airport itself. Travelers continued arriving before sunrise carrying business briefcases, vacation luggage, military uniforms, backpacks, and dreams of destinations scattered across the country. Every day thousands of strangers passed through the same security checkpoints, each bringing a different story that no one else could immediately see. Airport employees often reminded one another that every passenger represented more than a boarding pass or an identification card. Every person carried responsibilities, families, professions, and experiences hidden beneath ordinary appearances. Officer Ryan Mitchell no longer viewed those words as simple training philosophy. They had become part of the way he approached every conversation. Each shift now began with the same quiet commitment to greet people respectfully, explain procedures clearly, and listen before drawing conclusions. Fellow officers noticed the difference long before he ever spoke about it. Situations that might once have become tense often ended with calm understanding because travelers felt heard rather than judged. One afternoon, a newly assigned officer asked Ryan what had changed his perspective so completely. Ryan looked across the departure hall where families embraced before flights, business travelers hurried toward departure boards, and children watched airplanes through the wide terminal windows before answering. Every passenger deserves the chance to become more than my first impression. If I forget that, then I forget why public trust matters. The young officer quietly nodded, carrying those words into every assignment that followed. Across the country, Justice Evelyn Brooks continued serving on the Supreme Court with the same quiet discipline that had guided every stage of her career. Oral arguments, judicial conferences, written opinions, and constitutional questions continued filling each day with responsibility rather than recognition. She never referred publicly to the events inside the airport because she believed institutions became stronger by improving their future rather than reliving their past. During a judicial outreach program attended by university students interested in law, one student asked how people could remain calm when treated unfairly. Justice Brooks paused thoughtfully before answering. Character is tested most honestly when no one recognizes your title. If dignity depends upon recognition, then it was never truly dignity. The lecture hall became completely silent as students carefully wrote down every word. Months later, another public aviation education event welcomed schools, veterans, teachers, and community organizations into the airport to learn how aviation safety and public service worked together. Officer Ryan Mitchell volunteered throughout the afternoon, patiently helping travelers, answering questions, and personally escorting a nervous first-time flyer to the correct gate after noticing the passenger seemed overwhelmed by the crowded terminal. From across the concourse, Justice Brooks quietly observed the interaction while speaking with a group of students visiting the airport as part of a civic education program. She recognized the same officer immediately, but what she noticed most was not his face. It was the patience in his voice, the respect in his posture, and the willingness to listen before speaking. She smiled gently before continuing toward her own departure gate without interrupting the moment. Nothing more needed to be said because the lesson had already become visible through ordinary choices repeated every single day. As evening settled beyond the terminal windows and aircraft lifted gracefully into the fading sky one after another, passengers continued beginning journeys they hoped would end safely. Most never realized that one quiet morning had changed far more than a single encounter. It had strengthened the understanding that public trust is earned through countless ordinary moments where fairness replaces assumption, humility overcomes certainty, and respect is offered long before anyone's title is ever known. In the end, every destination begins with a first step, and every act of justice begins with the simple decision to see another human being before seeing anything else. By the time another season arrived, the airport had quietly become a place where one difficult morning continued shaping countless ordinary decisions. Flights still departed before sunrise, arrival boards continued changing by the minute, and thousands of travelers crossed polished terminal floors every day carrying different destinations, different responsibilities, and different stories. Most passengers never noticed the subtle changes taking place around them. They simply experienced courteous greetings, patient explanations, and respectful conversations from officers who had learned that professionalism was measured not only by enforcing procedures but by preserving trust. Airport Operations Director Michael Hayes often reminded new employees that security and dignity were never competing priorities. The safest airport is also the one where every traveler believes they will be treated fairly, he would say during orientation sessions. Officer Ryan Mitchell no longer viewed those words as policy written inside a training manual. They had become part of his daily routine. Every traveler received the same calm greeting. Every question was answered with patience. Every explanation was heard before conclusions followed. Other officers quietly noticed that stressful situations became easier to resolve because people felt respected from the very beginning. One newly assigned supervisor eventually asked Ryan why he spent extra moments speaking with travelers even during busy departure periods. Ryan looked across the terminal where children watched airplanes through wide glass windows, military families embraced before boarding, business travelers hurried toward departure screens, and elderly passengers carefully navigated crowded walkways before answering. People remember how they were treated long after they forget which gate they used. If we protect dignity first, security becomes stronger rather than weaker. Those words quietly spread through future training classes because they reflected experience rather than theory. Across the country, Justice Evelyn Brooks continued carrying out the responsibilities entrusted to her with the same thoughtful discipline that had always defined her service. Court sessions continued, constitutional questions demanded careful attention, and new generations of attorneys appeared before the highest court with the expectation that every argument would receive equal consideration. During a leadership seminar attended by judges, law professors, and students preparing for legal careers, one participant asked what quality mattered most in public service. Justice Brooks paused thoughtfully before replying. Titles introduce responsibility. Character proves whether someone deserves the trust that responsibility requires. The audience remained completely silent before writing down every word. Months later, another national transportation awareness event welcomed families, educators, veterans, and community organizations into the airport to learn how aviation safety and public service worked together. Officer Ryan Mitchell volunteered throughout the day, patiently helping first-time travelers understand boarding procedures while personally assisting anyone who appeared uncertain or overwhelmed by the busy terminal. Nearby, Justice Brooks quietly observed him guiding an elderly couple toward the correct departure gate after noticing they had become confused by recent schedule changes. He walked beside them, answered every question with genuine respect, and remained there until airline staff safely completed the boarding process. Justice Brooks smiled gently before continuing toward her own departure gate without interrupting the moment. She understood immediately that meaningful change rarely announced itself through dramatic speeches. It appeared quietly through ordinary choices repeated faithfully over time. As evening settled beyond the airport windows and aircraft lifted gracefully into the fading sky one after another, travelers continued beginning journeys that would carry them across the country. Most would never know the story that had once unfolded near Gate C. They would simply experience fairness, patience, professionalism, and quiet respect without realizing how carefully those values had been strengthened. Perhaps that was the greatest measure of justice. Not recognition. Not applause. Simply the quiet certainty that every person would be treated with dignity before assumptions had the chance to speak, allowing trust to travel farther than any airplane ever could. Another year quietly passed, and the airport continued welcoming millions of travelers whose stories remained invisible to everyone around them. Business executives hurried toward early departures, military families embraced before long flights, grandparents held the hands of excited grandchildren, and students began new chapters of life with backpacks resting against rolling suitcases. Every face carried a destination, yet none revealed the full journey behind it. Officer Ryan Mitchell now understood that truth more clearly than ever before. The security checkpoint where he worked each day looked exactly the same as it always had. The departure screen still changed every few minutes. Boarding announcements still echoed through the terminal. The lines still grew longer during busy travel hours. Yet something important had changed within the people responsible for protecting that space. Ryan no longer measured a successful shift by how quickly situations were resolved. Instead, he measured success by whether every traveler left feeling they had been treated with fairness and respect. New officers assigned to airport duty often asked why he spent extra time listening before making decisions. Ryan would simply smile and answer, "Every journey begins with trust. If we lose that before someone boards an airplane, then we have already lost something far more important than time." Those words quietly became part of everyday conversations throughout the terminal. Across the country, Justice Evelyn Brooks continued serving the Supreme Court with the same quiet discipline that had guided every stage of her remarkable career. Constitutional questions continued arriving before the court, attorneys continued presenting arguments, and the responsibility of interpreting the law remained as demanding as ever. Yet whenever she accepted invitations to speak with future judges, lawyers, or public servants, she always returned to one simple principle. The law cannot ask citizens to believe in fairness unless the people serving it demonstrate fairness first. Her audiences often remained silent after hearing those words because they understood that wisdom rarely needed dramatic language to leave a lasting impression. Several months later, Reagan National Airport hosted another national public service event where law enforcement agencies, aviation professionals, educators, and community organizations welcomed visitors interested in learning how transportation and public safety worked together. Officer Ryan Mitchell volunteered throughout the event, patiently assisting first-time travelers, answering children's questions about airport security, and helping an elderly veteran locate the correct departure gate after an unexpected schedule change. Across the concourse, Justice Evelyn Brooks noticed the interaction while walking toward another flight. She quietly watched Ryan remain beside the veteran until airline staff safely completed every boarding step before offering a warm handshake and wishing him a peaceful journey. She smiled softly without interrupting the moment. Nothing remained to be said because the lesson had already become visible through ordinary acts of kindness repeated day after day. As evening sunlight poured through the enormous terminal windows and painted long golden reflections across polished floors, another aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky while countless travelers continued moving toward destinations both near and far. Most of them never realized that one quiet morning had forever changed the way an airport served the people passing through it. They simply experienced courtesy, patience, professionalism, and dignity without knowing how carefully those values had been strengthened. Perhaps that is how justice was always meant to work. Not through applause, recognition, or public celebration, but through ordinary people choosing humility before certainty, understanding before assumption, and respect before judgment. A badge may represent responsibility. A judicial robe may represent the highest court in the nation. But neither carries lasting meaning without the character of the person wearing it. Because in the end, the strongest voice of justice is rarely the loudest one in the room. It is the quiet decision to see the human being before the title, to honor dignity before recognition, and to leave every encounter better than it began. That is the journey worth remembering long after every flight has landed and every destination has finally been reached.